Good morning, everyone. Have we got everyone here that we're expecting? Yep, thank you. Okay, so the time's 10 o'clock and it's now time to resume the inquiry into the appeal for outline application for up to 200 residential dwellings, including 30% affordable housing, planting, landscaping, public open space and children's play area and sustainable drainage system, with all matters reserved with the exception of access at land off Bournebridge Hill, Halstead. Can you all hear and see me okay before we go to that? Great, fantastic. So this is the second and I think final day of the inquiry. And so as per yesterday, we'll just aim to take breaks as and when it's suitable. So if you do need a break at any point, please do say. Yesterday, we heard from the appellant and the council with their opening submissions. We heard from the parish council and witnesses for the appellant, Mr. Longden, Mr. Regan and Mr. Dutton. And today we've got scheduled a discussion of the suggested conditions and the planning obligation, and then I'll hear the closing submissions for the council if they wish to make any, and the appellant. So before we move on, just to confirm, I have received the second map showing the routes from the appeal site through the estates and round. So thank you very much for putting that together so quickly. That's really helpful. Is there anyone here today who wishes to speak that hasn't already indicated that they wish to do so? Nope. Okay. And are there any procedural or housekeeping matters before we begin?
Adam, could I just raise one, please? We've forwarded via the case officer this morning a summary of the planning obligation. I don't know whether that's reached you yet.
It hasn't yet, but if we start with the conditions this morning, then perhaps it will make its way through. I'm not sure whether ASOS is actually in or not, so I think someone else is keeping an eye on her inbox, and so that's why there's a bit of delay. I think there's a few people off, so the case officers are covering more than one inquiry, I think, but I'll let you know as soon as it comes. Mr. Ranatunga.
Yes, just one from the council. I'm aware that you've got the section 106 obligation. I think you indicated yesterday that you had no particular issues with it.
That's
the only thing I'm mindful of is still compliance statements, which are often required. So I believe Neil Jones has emailed PINS. It's only this morning and only recently this morning with our compliance statement. So I'm hoping that will find its way to you at some point. But I just want to flag that.
Lovely, that's perfect. Thank you very much. Well, if we start with the conditions and go through those, and then we can take a short break and I can chase up anything that sort of remains outstanding so that we've got those for the section 106. So, all right, thank you very much. Are you happy to crack on with the conditions now then? Anything else or good to go?
Just to say that I'm going to bring in Neil Jones on conditions, who's the principal planning officer.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Jones.
Yes, Madam, Mr. Dutton's going to lead on the conditions for the appellant as well.
Lovely, thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Dutton. Okay, well the conditions that I've got are the ones that were sent through Monday evening, I think. So it may be that things have slightly evolved and some of my questions are a bit out of date. Have there been any other updates, or should we work from this and go through each one at a time?
Morning, ma'am. There was a further copy circulated this morning, first thing about around 9 o'clock. And again, ISOSA was copied into that.
Right.
We can send it across to, I think Helen Skinner has also, we've had some correspondence with Helen. So it would be helpful to forward on to Helen as well, so that it makes it way to you. But happy to just talk you through it as we run through the conditions, if that's easier.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I mean, you can send it to Helen. I think Helen's in, so you can send it through to her as well if you like, and it'll pop up as we make a start, if that's convenient for you. Well,
okay. Yes. Yeah. We'll arrange for that. Lovely.
Okay, so if we make a start then on what I've got in front of me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on anything. So it's I mean, sort of the way I approach this is just to go through each condition at a time, see if you have any comments, ask any questions. I've not got loads of questions. I mean, a lot of them are they appear to be agreed and they seem to be sort of standard conditions. So I don't anticipate it's going to be too onerous, but if you're happy to sort of go through one at a time, then I'll kick off with number one. So with regards to the first condition, I note that there's a reduced time frame, which I think, Mr. Dutton, you've covered in your evidence as well, haven't you? And I just wondered whether this is necessary. What would the implications be of using the normal sort of 3 and 2 years? Whether you have any sort of thoughts on that, please.
Would you like us to go first? I mean, I think from our perspective, I think it was to provide comfort in relation to the housing land supply position in the district, that the appeal scheme could be brought forward quickly. And it also reflects, I think it's paragraph 77 of the MPPF in that respect. But I mean, from our perspective as a site promoter, as sort of detailed yesterday, irrespective of what the timescale is in the condition, I think there would be this scheme would come forward quickly if you are minded to go with the standard condition, ma'am.
Thank you. And Mr. Jones?
I think we're quite happy to accept the shorter time period that's been suggested by the applicant. Anything that helps bring the site forward, if it's given approval by yourself, would obviously assist the council in securing a 5-year supply, which is obviously what we're working really hard to try and do.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Are there any other comments then on number 1, condition 1?
Nope. Not from our perspective, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So question, conditions 2 and 3. I think I understand the issues with the the development framework plan. So from the appellant's view, is it more of an indicative plan, and there could be changes to it when the reserve matters comes, which is why you're not keen to have it in condition 2? Is my understanding correct on that?
Yes, essentially, ma'am. I think that is the case. Obviously, this is an outline planning application. As things stand, that is an illustrative development framework plan. So therefore, when a proposal comes forward at the reserve matter stage, that is the appropriate point to sort of finalise the detail, as it were. But we recognise, noting the council's comments, that there is some logic in having it as a sort of a broad accordance condition, because it does set out sort of broad parameters for the site, which are probably applicable to the evidence that you've heard.
Yeah. So, Mr. Jones, does that give you enough comfort to have it as condition 3, so it's referred to as sort of almost like a base plan for which the reserve matters can be built upon?
Yes, ma'am. So that was something that was suggested by the appellant, and that's in the revised version that we've agreed between ourselves. So unfortunately, you don't have a copy of that, but we're comfortable that. I think it's important that it is referenced in the decision, because right, the council negotiated some of the parameters around the landscaping buffers, for example, the offset between the development parcels and the what potentially would be a strategic relief road or a bypass. So I think there's some important parameters within there. So we think it's useful to make sure that's clear in any permission that were to be granted. But we think by adding it to condition 3, we would be comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you. So condition 2 would just be the site location plan and the proposed site access revision E. So, okay, thank you. So condition 4 on my list, I've got the site access to be brought forward in line with SK03 revision E. I don't think I've got any comments from either of you on that, and I've got no questions on that. Is there anything you'd like to say about condition 4? Thank you. Condition 5 is the biodiversity net gain report, and there was an amendment I can see where it refers to the difframetric 3.1 instead of 3.0. Oh no, I thought we'd lost Mr. Jones, but you've moved, everyone's just moved around on my screen, and I looked up and you're all in different places and it threw me for a minute. So there's a series of bullet points in this condition. I just wanted to double check, do the things in the bullet points relate to the 3.1 metric? There's not been any fundamental changes that would lead to any of those being out of date or anything?
My understanding, ma'am, from having checked with our ecologist, is that the changes to the metric to 3.1 weren't particularly significant changes. They were sort of tweaks and technical details, so they were comfortable that the bullet points remained relevant.
Thank you. Mr. Dutton, do you have any comments on that one?
No, there's no observations for other than the change to reference the 3.1 metric. There's no observations from us on that either.
Thank you. So condition 6, I've got the landscaping ecological management plan. I don't know whether this still tallies with your list, so do shout up if there's one missing or anything like that. I see no comments from either of you on that, and I'd got no questions, so everyone's happy with that one, are they? Yep, getting nods, perfect. Thank you. The same. Condition 7 on the copy I've got, it's been reworded to take out the residential plots, and there's quite a lot of changes. Were the changes made in agreement with each other?
I think. Sorry, Ma'am. I was going to say I think this has been. I can't recall which version of this you've got, but there is agreement between us on the wording of this condition on the latest version that was circulated this morning.
Right. Yeah.
So I think Mr. Jones updated the wording, and then we said, yeah, effectively we are in agreement with it.
Yes. Okay. I think on the version I've got, there's the removal of reference to the residential plots, and it seems to be a more general, sort of overarching landscape policy.
That's right, Ma'am. Just to point out, what we did also do was add that there's to be some advanced planting to be done. So the usual manner of things would be there would be an implementation programme which would be agreed as part of the landscaping scheme. But because of the importance of securing planting to sort of mitigate some of the visual impact and that we heard from Mr. Longdon about, what the council was keen to do is to get that planting in as early as possible. So rather than wait until the development's largely completed and then the planting's made, that it be done in advance of the first planting season after development commences.
Right. Okay. Mr. Dutton, you're in agreement with that?
Yeah, we're happy with that, Ma'am.
Okay, condition 8, the version I've got just added in layout to the landscaping. So you've got no, is there anything you wish to say about condition 8 at this stage? No. Okay. Great, thank you. Condition 9, with regards to the survey, I've got comments from both of you. Mr. Dutton, I see you've suggested a different wording, and Mr. Jones, you've explained because of the site levels and the topography of the site, you consider that the original wording should be used. Are there any comments you wish to make to expand on that at this stage?
Again, Ma'am, this might be one where it'd probably be helpful for you to see the latest conditions that we've now said in the version that's gone back to the council this morning that we're happy with the original wording that was proposed by the authority.
Okay.
So there should be agreement.
Yeah, because I think the one I've got, you'd suggested similar wording to the front, but it had taken out the proposed garden levels. Are they back in now then?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, and you're happy with that? Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, it's probably quite difficult for you to explain to me what's in a different document, but I'm still waiting for them to pop through. So if anything crops up prior to the closings, I can always ask again. So condition 10, which is the electric vehicle charging points. On the version I've got, there's a reference to building regs requiring electric vehicle charging points. Have you reached agreement on this, or is it covered by different legislation, do you think?
I think we're happy, but we're happy to have a condition as well, Ma'am, belt and brace. I know there are sort of nuances between the building regulations and what a planning condition may do in relation to EV charging points. So we're happy to have a condition as well as sort of relying on the building regulations.
I mean, does this condition sort of go over and above what's required for building regs, or is it sort of more or less in line with it?
I think the point Oops, sorry, I was just going to say, Mum, the point from the council would be that it gives us a greater degree of control. So we're obviously looking to make sure that things are done in an appropriate manner, thinking about aesthetics as well as practicalities, and making sure that it's as attractive as an option as possible to encourage people to use them. So it's just trying to go above and beyond, I guess, what the regulations require, and make sure it's done in the most appropriate fashion.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I understand. Mr. Dutton, any comments?
No further comments from me in that respect.
Thank you. So condition 11, which is to do with the acoustics, I noticed there has been some changes to this. I don't know whether it's changed further because of the potential highway noise. That's where I've got. And there were some questions here from Mr. Dutton with regards to part O of the building regs. Are you able to update me with condition 11?
Yes, again, Ma'am. So again, depending which version you have in front of you, we've made a slight amendment to I think it's the third part of the condition where it talks about an overheating assessment. So where it talks about the acoustics, ventilation and overheating residential design guide, it talks about that, and then after where it says all relevant successor documents, we've added in a reference there in brackets to say or in accordance with building regulations approved document part O where applicable. Because again, it's similar. It's a similar situation to the EV charging points where there is some overlap between what the building regulations require and what the condition require. But again, it might just be helpful to have the condition to have a sort of like greater clarity if required.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I understand. Mr. Jones, anything to add to that?
No, that's okay. Nothing to add, Mum.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Condition 12, the version I've got, the last bullet point had been deleted because that was covered by the section 106. Are there any further updates to that? That was the refuse scheme. So, no. Okay. I'd got no comments on condition 13, which was the walls, fences and boundary treatments. Anything for that? Nope. Okay, thank you. And similarly with the lighting scheme, I've got no questions or anything on that. Was there any points you wish to make on that? That's condition 14. Nope. Okay, thank you. So there was just a change, a couple of words deleted from condition 15. And I see that the figures referred to are those referenced by the SUDS team. Are there any comments with regards to that? No. Thank you. Yeah, condition 16, I understand what it's achieving. I just wondered whether you could explain why you considered that was necessary to get sort of the building confirmation reports and things. Mr. Jones, I don't know.
Yes, Ma'am, that's the council's request. We have unfortunately had some instances in the past with some house builders where there's been a requirement to provide housing to a certain standard on the building regulations, and the requirement was that they need to provide a certificate to evidence that that's been provided, when it's been built. The problem that we've had is that some units have actually been built in a manner that doesn't accord, and it's only come to light when the developer, well, it's only come to light to the council when the developer has tried to get certification to discharge a condition. Right. So from that experience, we are suggesting that there is a requirement that the developer evidences to us that they've had the plans checked by an appropriately qualified person and that what they've intending to build does actually comply, so that the council can be more confident that they actually do provide on site what it is they're required to by condition, rather than simply requiring a compliance type condition, which is that they evidence they've done it at the end of the process when it's a bit late if they haven't.
Yeah, I understand. So does this condition give you a bit more comfort for if example they use an external building control team and not the council's one, it's probably harder to keep track, is it?
Yeah, I think we're not so concerned about whether it's the council's building control service or an approved inspector. It's just the fact that somebody who is qualified to assess from the building regs point of view, other than placing the reliance on the architect working for the house builder, who perhaps isn't always best placed to, from our experience, best placed to assess it. We think it's just a more appropriate way of doing it to avoid future problems.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Mr. Dutton, any comments on that one?
No, ma'am, no comments from our perspective.
All right, thank you. Okay. So I've got condition 17, which is to provide housing in accordance with the strategic housing market assessment. And there's been some suggested changes, Mr. Dutton, in your column. Change to reference LPP 35 and some slight wording. Has that been updated on the latest version?
No, Matt. In the latest version that was circulated to the council this morning, we've explained that we would still like the addition, as it were, that we've added to that condition to be retained, because that would be then consistent with policy LPP 35 in the Section 2 local plan.
So that's the material considerations indicate otherwise flexibility part of it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Jones, any comments on that?
Yes, ma'am. I think that does cause the council some concerns. When the policy was drafted, having spoken to the policy team, the material consideration point was more about the context of the site. So if, for example, you were in a conservation area or you had a town centre location, there was a particular characteristic, it might not be appropriate to provide a mix of market housing which reflected the need in the SHMA. However, we don't believe those sorts of considerations apply here. This is a significant greenfield site on the edge of a main town. We can't see any similar reason whereby a mix of market housing, which of course with the SHMA shouldn't be provided. We're a bit concerned that whilst the condition that Gladman have suggested, or the appellant suggested, indicates that it should be in accordance with the SHMA, we believe it introduces some doubt in a developer's mind as to how strictly the council will enforce that, or what the council's requirement is. And we can see dispute coming about over what a material consideration would be. We've certainly had discussions with developers on other sites where material considerations they consider would be what they considered the market's preferences and the market demand is. The council have had significant problems prior to the introduction of this policy with developers wanting to build predominantly 4 and 5 bed houses on a lot of sites, which is there is a demand for, and the properties have sold, so we don't have an issue with that, but that's not addressing all parts of the need in the housing market. That's certainly not helping in terms of providing affordable market housing to the housing stock. So we think the addition of that tailpiece is unhelpful and unnecessary.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dutton, do you have any further comments?
Again, Mark, I would just reiterate that our preference would be to have the tailpiece in there. That's consistent with the policy. I accept what Mr. Jones has just sort of explained to you there. But I think, as I said, our preference would be to retain the tailpiece. And I think from our perspective, again, I understand what the SHMA says, the purpose of the document. Its needs assessment is a snapshot in time. And I would just think it would just add a greater degree of flexibility into the condition.
Okay, thank you.
Madam, I don't know if I can just add one comment to that. Obviously,
Yep.
We're talking about tailpieces, and you'll probably be familiar, I think, that the courts have urged, at the very least, to put it mildly, caution with regards to tailpieces in conditions. Now, that's in the context of clauses like unless otherwise agreed with a council. And that's not quite the wording here, but to the extent that it has that effect, the courts have urged caution, because obviously this is a public document and we shouldn't be seen to be sidestepping the planning process or variation of conditions by including such tailpieces. I'm sure you're familiar with the principle. And I think it's just right to have regard to that in this context. As Mr. Jones has outlined, the inclusion of that clause within policy LPP 35 was not to allow that sort of general flexibility, but to allow the site context to be considered. And by including this clause as proposed by the appellant, I think it has a tendency to allow that sort of wider flexibility, which is not what was envisaged by the policy, and the courts have urged caution and in fact severed tail pieces in a slightly different form for that reason.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further comments on that? Nope. Okay, well, that's fine. I'll consider both sides and make a judgment on that if necessary. So thank you. So condition 18, contaminated land, standard condition. No comments from you. I've got no questions. Is there anything you'd like to say on that one? Thank you. And 19, which is the construction management plan. I've got no questions on there. Anything you'd like to say about that one? Nope. Okay, thank you. Keep on questions. Condition 20, the groundworks and the construction environmental management plan. There's a reference to an April 2020 report. Has the condition been reworded in the later version to reflect that? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it has, Mum. Sorry, that was I apologise. That was my mistake when I drafted the policy originally. I've referred to the wrong reporting error. My apologies.
No, that's not a problem at all. So that's all up to date. That's fine. Is there anything else you'd like to say about that condition? Okay. Condition 21, which is your hours of construction. Any comments on those? Happy with the finish times and no Sundays, public bank holidays? Yep, I'm getting nods. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got the drainage and surface water runoff conditions 22. I'd got no questions on that. I've seen the drainage submissions and things that have been put forward with the application, so there's nothing for me to ask on that. Are you both happy with that one? Thank you. Condition 23, the maintenance, again, no comments from me. Is there anything you'd wish to point out on that one? Great, thank you. And then the archaeological standard condition, I'd got no queries on that. Is there anything on that one? Nope. Again, materials for external finishes, I've got no concerns with that. Is there anything you'd like to point out? Yeah. Okay. The revised residential travel plan, it was just, I was just wondering why a revised residential travel plan was required.
I think it's because the version that submitted with the appeal effectively is a framework travel plan. So it'll effectively be a full version of the travel plan. So I think that's what the intention is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones.
Yeah, just that, and that accords with the recommendation of the Highway Authority, who obviously provided the council with a consultation response and advice in terms of highways and transportation matters.
Thank you. Lovely, thank you very much. Condition 27 for the yearly logs of maintenance. Is it worth? It may be something that you've already picked up. In the condition, it doesn't actually say the maintenance for what, maintenance plan for what. It's only in the reason that it says for SUDS. So is it worth just adding in maintenance for the SUDS systems? Are you happy for me to add that in?
Yes, ma'am, definitely.
Oh. Okay,
thank you.
And then we've got conditions 28, 29, 30, 31, 32 and 33, which have been deleted because they're all covered by the section 106. Is that correct on my version?
I think we've got, I think 28 has been deleted because it duplicated the construction management plan.
Sorry, 29 is parts A and C, isn't it?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
29 was again, so 29 parts A and C replicated.
Yes.
I think it was the access conditions. There's been some further dialogue, Ma'am, on the requirement for the bus stop element of it. So we have proposed some alternative wording that was sent across to the council. I don't know if Mr. Jones can sort of feedback on whether or not he's content with that revised wording or not.
Yep. So sorry, I had some email problems this morning. I was neither sending or receiving emails, so I had a flurry of stuff come through. So sorry, that was my for not being able to get back to Mr. Dutton. I have now got the email and reviewed it, and I'm happy with the wording that's been suggested this morning. So when that version reaches you, Ma'am, that will have the council's agreement on the wording for that condition.
Lovely, thank you very much. Yes, and then 30, 31, 32 and 33, they're deleted in their entirety, is that correct?
Yes, Ma'am. Yeah, they replicated the section 106.
Agreement. Perfect, thank you. Okay, I think that was all the questions I had with regards to the conditions. Are there any further points you wish to make on them at this stage? No, that's great. I'll confirm when the conditions come through. I have just received the planning obligation summary, so things are starting to trickle through now. I've now got the SIL compliance statement, so that's just appeared as I've been speaking. So it's just the updated conditions I'm waiting for, is that correct? Yes. Okay, thank you.
Yes,
thank you. Well, I've got hang on. Oh no, that's still the compliance statement. So I've got my notes on here. If there's anything in the revised list of conditions that I'm not sure about, and we haven't finished, then I'll quickly ask again before the end of the inquiry, or if not, I can always put something in writing just to clarify matters. But I think I'm quite clear on what we've discussed, so thank you very much. Should we, I just wonder whether to take a 10-minute break just so that I can have a quick look through the planning obligation summary and the SIL compliance statement just before we actually do that session. Would that be okay for everyone? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so it's 10:30 now. If we come back at 10:40, is that okay just for the section 106 session? Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, welcome back. Thank you for that short break. I can confirm now I've received the conditions table as well. So I've now got all 3 documents that were sent through. And just in case you need it for your records, I've marked the planning obligation summary as ID4. I've done the still compliance statement as ID5 and the condition table as ID6. Are there any procedural issues or anything before we move on to the section 106?
Yes, madam. We think that you might have missed the walking route plan off your inquiry documents list.
Oh, yes, I have got those on there. I'll add them together as ID7 and A and B. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other points before we move on? Yep. Well, I had a few questions and things just to go through on the section 106. I think probably quite a lot of them have been addressed now by the still compliance statement, which seems to set out sort of the positions. So I don't anticipate this taking a great deal of time. So I'll just go through and pick up sort of any outstanding ones or ones that I just need to clarify, if that's okay. Unless you prefer to go through each one step by step. No, yeah, okay. Well, to begin with, I just wanted to clarify, I don't know whether it's a typo or whether it is the address, but on the first page, where the agreement is between number 3, Simon Henry Cook of Deers Green, is that a duplicate or is it Deers of Deers Green? Just
It's accurate, madam. It's not a
okay.
Duplication.
No, that's fine then. I just wondered. Okay. I see it includes a blue pencil clause just in case I find that anything shouldn't take effect. So that's helpful. Thank you. And section 7 covers the council and county council's monitoring fees. That's standard. With regards to the affordable housing, I'm looking at the definitions. I haven't got page numbers, I don't think, but it's 3 pages in on the schedule 1 for the affordable housing. It refers to staircasing, where people can sort of buy a bit more over time. So am I correct in understanding that for the affordable housing over time, it could be that everyone buys all of the housing and there's no affordable housing left on site? Or how does that work?
Madam, the staircasing provisions would only apply to those affordable units that are shared ownership or shared equity. So in theory, all of those could become bought and taken up, but they wouldn't, I imagine, be 100% of the affordable housing.
Okay. That's helpful, thank you. I think 70% of the affordable housing is affordable housing for rent and 30% is intermediate housing. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. So it's that 30% of the 30%. Affordable housing that would be potentially liable to the staircasing provisions.
Thank you, that's helpful. Mr. Jones, did you have anything to add to that? Or?
No, Mr. Carter beat me to it. I was just going to try and assist there, but that's fine. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Okay. I've got no queries on the yellow land or the Skylark habitat location. It was all quite self-explanatory. I've got a couple of questions on the healthcare contributions, but they've been addressed by the still compliance statement. So thank you for that. and the ecological mitigation, that's derived from the appropriate assessment and the responses on that. Is that correct? Yes. Thank you. Okay, so jumping forward to Schedule 11, which is the education contribution. In terms of some of the definitions, there's early years and childcare pupil product and primary pupil product. Does that mean the number of children likely to be living in the properties? Is that what that is?
Yeah, Madam, it's a very ugly legalese way of putting that. Yes, it's
Yeah.
the number of children who, and obviously it depends on the size of the dwelling, how many primary and secondary school children you're likely to have living in that house, and it's done on a calculation basis based on empirical evidence. But that, yes, that's what that's driving at.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And then moving to Schedule 12 for the highways, in the meanings, the primary road, I noticed it specifies certain carriageway width and things. Is that to comply with the future sort of link road bypass? Would that meet the specifications of that? So that secures that, so the road can be joined up in the future if necessary. Yeah, they were all the questions that I had then following the SIL compliance statement. Was there anything else that you wanted to say about the legal agreement at this stage?
Madam, could I just draw one matter to your attention, which is again perhaps just for information more than anything else. In Schedule 2, on the open space and amenity areas, you've dealt with the ecological contributions and their connection to the appropriate assessment. I think we ought to just also point out that you'll see the definition of the circular walking route.
Yes.
That circular walking route of 2.7 kilometres in length is also an important part of the mitigation that meant that likely significant effects on the nearby SPA, etc., were avoided. So that's another important component part of avoiding habitats damage.
Thank you. Yes, I thought that was the case because I think Mr. Dutton mentioned that in his evidence yesterday, and it's the dog bins and the dog exercise area as well as part of that, was it? Yes, yeah. Yep. Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other comments at this stage then? No? Okay, thank you. I did check all the plan references as well, and they all match up okay. So I'm happy with the plans and everything submitted as well. Okay, that's really helpful then, and thank you for the summary and the SIL statement. They're also very helpful. I'll take a look through those. The obligation isn't dated at this stage, is that correct? But it's signed.
Madam, now we know that it's survived your scrutiny, we will obviously date it. So anybody who, I don't know, I must confess I don't precisely know where the originals are, but anybody who's got custody of an original should now date it with today's date, and then that locks the documents and makes them fully effective.
That's with Sarah Hare.
Hi. Just to introduce myself, I'm Sarah Hare, solicitor for the council. I just wanted to say that I've got the originals with me, so I can date them today, and then I could probably get a scanned copy of that tomorrow, if that would be okay, and circulate to the parties. Okay, yep. Thank you.
Yes, that'd be helpful. Thank you. And I'll wait, although I'll close the inquiry once we've finished the closings. I'll close it with the exception of receiving the signed copy of the section 106. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, I think that's everything then on the legal agreement and the conditions, unless you've got anything further to add. Nope. Okay, so that leaves us with the closing submissions. Mr. Ranatunga, yesterday you mentioned about possibly wanting to do one depending on what came out of the conditions in section 106 discussions. Is there?
No, there's nothing arising, Madam, as anticipated and as per the statement of common ground. I was only intending to assist you on those matters, and there's nothing that arises that I feel I need to assist you further on, if that's all right.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Carter, it will just be closings from you. Do you want to have a short break before you do them, or to prepare?
Madam, we've just pressed the button on sending them to the case officer and to the council, so I'm ready to go when they've arrived. If you want a short break to wait for the email to arrive, that's fine, but I'm otherwise ready.
Okay. Shall we take 5 minutes then, just till 5 to 11, and if it hasn't come through, then I'll pop back on and I'll chase it up in those 5 minutes and just let you know. But hopefully that should be enough time. Is that okay with you, Mr. Ranatunga, as well? Yep. I'll just mute myself and turn my camera off rather than go out for 5 minutes. But yes, thank you very much. Hello. They haven't quite reached me yet. Did you want to make a start, and I can make? Never mind. They're here. Just bear with me one moment while I just. Right, Mr. Carter, sorry about that. I'll mark them as ID8, just for your records, your closing submissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if you're ready, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Madam, I've structured my closing submissions to address the main issues that you identified in the first CMC note, and I also deal with some additional matters that are necessary to explain our case overall. And I'll start with the Council's position. The Council's decided not to defend the appeal. It's done so after the publication of a new 5-year supply assessment showing that there is no more than a 4.86-year supply of deliverable housing land, but it's the appellant's position that the Council's case was always weak. The landscape and visual impacts of the proposal were found to be acceptable by independent consultants appointed by the Council. That advice was accepted by officers. The careful and thorough officers' report addressed all other material considerations and recommended that planning permission should be granted. Importantly, that recommendation was made at a time when the Council considered that it did have at least a 5-year supply of deliverable housing land, and so the officer's report approached the application on the basis of an orthodox or flat balance. As you know, the members disagreed and they devised 2 reasons for refusal. The second, on minerals issues, has been resolved. It was always capable of being resolved. The updated mineral resource assessment shows that given the amount of workable resource under the useless overburden and the standoff distances that would be required for existing housing, no viable resource exists on the site, nor would extraction prior to residential development be viable or practical given the depth of the mineral below the overburden. Overburden and mineral resource would have to be removed to a depth of 14 metres below ground level, meaning that large amounts of material would have to be removed, stored and replaced, or other fill material imported, or significantly lower ground levels left in place. None of these options are viable or practicable. Essex County Council, as Mineral Planning Authority, have seen and agree with that updated assessment, and their original objection has been withdrawn, and reason for refusal too was withdrawn by the District Council. The first reason for refusal was a reason which officers plainly either could not or would not defend, as the Council's case was being prepared on the basis that the relevant evidence would not be given by professional witnesses, but by the Council's own elected members. But however it's arisen, and whatever the Council's original position, it no longer opposes this appeal. The appellant's case is entirely unchallenged by the local planning authority, and whilst it couldn't be persuaded to agree that the appeal should be allowed, the Council certainly don't seek to persuade you, Madam, that the appeal should be dismissed. The presentation of the appellant's case has demonstrated, I submit, that there is no proper basis for dismissing the appeal, given the high hurdle that is imposed by the tilted planning balance. And I then turn to the first substantive issue, which is whether the proposed development would be in a suitable location, having regard to access to services and facilities. And I start at the more strategic end of the scale. Holstead is a location which is suitable for additional housing within the district. Policy SP3 of the Section 1 local plan provides that existing settlements will be the principal focus for additional growth, with development being accommodated either within or adjoining those settlements. The policy sets out that growth will be planned to ensure settlements maintain their character. The Council doesn't allege that Holstead's character will be adversely affected by the appeal scheme. Paragraph 3.3 of the Section 1 local plan sets out that the main focus would be Braintree and the A12 corridor, Witham and 3 named service villages. Holstead and other parts of the district would have smaller allocations to reflect that they were not as sustainable. but there was no prescribed limit on Halstead's growth and no indication in the Section 1 local plan about what, if any, capacity limit existed in Halstead. The precise approach was left to the Section 2 local plan. And that plan, adopted in July this year, takes an approach with a different emphasis from paragraph 3.3 of the Section 1 local plan. Its paragraph 3.5 identifies towns as the top tier in the hierarchy, comprising Braintree, Witham and Halstead. And the spatial strategy is set out in the box at paragraph 3.10 as that the broad spatial strategy for the Braintree district should concentrate development on the town of Braintree, Witham and the A12/Great Eastern Mainline Corridor and Halstead. The Section 2 local plan did not allocate the appeal site, nor did it prescribe any maximum figure for growth in the town or provide that development management for housing should be more restrictive there when compared to the other towns or the corridors. It did have a settlement boundary applied to it, in common with other settlements, which has development management implications, which I address later, but that was a point in common with and not different from the treatment of other settlements. The point raised in the council statement of case before it abandoned its opposition to the scheme, that locating the growth proposed in the application at Halstead was in breach of the spatial strategy, is simply unsupported by the development plan. It was an argument based on paragraph 3.3 of the Section 1 local plan, not the policies. But even if there is some tension between the two parts of the development plan and the supporting text in Section 1 is wrongly treated as a policy provision, then the Section 2 local plan has to be preferred because that's the effect of Section 38.5 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, which I set out in the footnote. In principle, therefore, Halstead is a location suitable for additional growth. The appeal site itself would be a suitable location for accommodating up to 200 new homes in terms of the access to services and facilities. As an obvious starting point, it's noteworthy that the council recently granted planning permission for new residential development immediately to the north of the appeal site, and in doing so, it must have been satisfied that that site would provide appropriate access to a suitable range of services and facilities. The same is true of the appeal site. Mr. Regan's evidence comprehensively demonstrates why that is the case. The Highway Authority never raised any objection to the appeal scheme on accessibility grounds or indeed any other highway or transport related issues. Halstead has a good range of local services and facilities illustrated on the plans at Mr. Regan's evidence, and those plans address no fewer than 96 different local facilities and services in Halstead, the vast majority of which are within the 1.2 and 2 kilometre walk distances which he considers it appropriate to use and which accord with the guidance he has cited in section 4.2 of his proof. Those facilities and services comprise a broad range of retail, service, community and leisure uses, including a well-stocked co-op, which is within an 800 or 1 kilometre walk distance of the appeal site, depending on journey origin within the appeal site. In addition to the convenient distances, the pedestrian routes are qualitatively acceptable. They are relatively level and are lit and are secure. There would be suitable pedestrian accessibility to the secondary school, which at 2.5 kilometres from the appeal site is well under the 4.8 kilometres or 3 mile distance at which free school transport has to be provided. The same facilities are within a convenient cycle catchment area. Mr. Regan has used a distance of 5 kilometres as an acceptable cycling distance. Halstead Hospital and the employment opportunities and Bournebridge Industrial Estate lie outside the 2 kilometre walk catchment, but within the 5 kilometre cycling catchment. And more confident cyclists could also access villages, including Gosfield, White Ash Green and Greenstead Green. Mr. Regan's views on cycling and walking reflect the view expressed in paragraph 11.3.20 of the officer report. As for public transport, the nearest bus stops lie at the northwest corner of the site. Those stops are served by the 89 service, plus once a day additional school services. The 89 service provides access to a range of employment, retail and leisure destinations and Braintree itself. It operates from 7 AM to 7 PM 6 days a week at an hourly service, and so can be used to access traditional working hours employment along the route. Additional bus stops are a 5-minute walk from the site where the 88 service can be accessed. That provides access to Colchester, between 6:30 a.m. and 11:30 p.m. half hourly, 6 days a week, with a bus every 2 hours on Sundays between 9 a.m. and 10 p.m. There is thus very good access to bus services. The appeal scheme would deliver improvements to 2 bus stops to upgrade them to Essex County Council's latest standards. It is inevitable that a large proportion of journeys will be by car. However, car journeys would be relatively short, and Mr. Regan produces evidence that the average car commuting distances for Halstead are shorter than for the district as a whole. See table LDR 4.1 of his proof. Further, of course, journeys by low or ultra-low emission vehicles are treated as sustainable in any event, and EV charging infrastructure would be provided as part of the development, secured by a condition, and a travel plan would also maximise the take-up of sustainable modes. Overall, the appeal site would provide good opportunities for sustainable travel to a good range of local services and facilities. The appeal scheme would accord with policy SP1 of the Section 1 local plan and policies LPP 42, 45 and 52 Part K of the Section 2 local plan. It would also accord with paragraphs 105 and 110A of the framework. I then turn to the effect of the development on the character and appearance of the area and the countryside. The landscape and visual effects of the scheme would, we say, be acceptable. The application was accompanied by an LVIA produced by Mr. Longden's firm. It was prepared under his supervision and he agrees with its conclusions. He's visited the site to ensure that its findings remain up to date and he's satisfied that they do. There is no contradictory assessment before you, Madam. The LVIA follows best practice in the 3rd edition of the Guidelines for Landscape and Visual Impact Assessment, produced by the Landscape Institute. The Council's consultant agreed that GLVIA 3 had been followed and the LVIA's methodology was sound. The reason for refusal previously promoted by the Council contained 2 matters that related to landscape and visual issues. They were allegations that, firstly, new development on land designated as the countryside was strictly controlled in order to protect and enhance its landscape character and amenity, and second, that the proposal would have a detrimental visual impact upon character and appearance of the locality, countryside and the rural landscape. The first element is really a planning point, not a true landscape and visual one about the specific application, and the second, notably, merely asserted an adverse effect, not an adverse effect of any particular level, or that it would be unacceptable. The LVIA addresses both landscape and visual effects, and I deal first with landscape character matters. The site comprises 13.34 hectares of arable land adjacent to the southwest edge of Halstead, with recently completed development at its north side. The site is made up of 2 complete field parcels and part of a larger eastern field, which has been created by hedgerow removal post-2009. The western boundary is defined by the A131 with trees but no hedgerow, and the northern boundary comprises mixed vegetation. The eastern boundary is a mature hedge. The western part of the southern boundary is a hedgerow with occasional oak trees, and its eastern half is presently open. Agricultural land lies to the south. It gently slopes from north to south, with the slopes becoming steeper the further south one goes. The landscape character of the area around the appeal site has undergone recent change, and figures 2 to 4 in Appendix B of Mr. Longden's evidence shows how the area has changed since the year 2000, and those changes comprise the establishment of a shelter belt along the northern site boundary since 2000, the establishment of a large area of woodland west of the A131 since 2000, the establishment of a large conifer plantation north of the Bourne Brook from 2005, the removal of the hedge forming the eastern part of the southern site boundary since 2009, the removal of large agricultural buildings at Upper Beakley Farm to the east of the appeal site since 2011, the development of the housing to the immediate north of the site between 2018 and 2021, and the enclosure of footpath 8821 by a newly planted hedgerow from 2022. Many of these developments post-date landscape character assessments which have been carried out, meaning that they are not factually up to date. And as Mr. Longden also points out, many of them are also methodologically out of date. The appeal site isn't within or close to an area with any statutory or policy landscape designation. Mr. Longden has assessed the area against the criteria in box 5.1 of Livia 3, as updated by Technical Guidance Note 221, and he's found that the landscape does not merit description as a valued landscape. The council never contended that the landscape met those criteria either. Overall, he concludes, on proper grounds and with cogent reasons, that the landscape on and around the appeal site has a medium to low value, and there is no contradictory assessment before the inquiry. There are 3 landscape assessments that have been produced since 2006. The Braintree District Landscape Character Assessment 2006, the Braintree District Settlement Fringes Landscape Capacity Analysis 2007, and the Braintree District Settlement Fringes Evaluation of Landscape Analysis Study of Holstead 2015. And I didn't think I was going to get through all of those without tripping up on at least one of them. As explained by Mr. Longden at paragraph 7.2 and 7.3 of his evidence, none of these are consistent with up-to-date recommendations on methodology. The 2006 assessment puts the site within landscape character area F1, the Gosfield Wooded Farmland, at its eastern extremity in a narrow part of the LCA. At a broad scale, this assessment says that the area has a high sensitivity to change, and Mr. Longden gives his reasons for disagreeing with that assessment insofar as the areas around the appeal site are concerned. And those reasons in brief are the changes to the baseline landscape since the report was produced, the out-of-date methodology used, the assessment uses too narrow a range of factors compared to up-to-date methodology, and the assessment addresses a large area to inform strategic planning rather than individual planning applications. The 2007 capacity analysis puts the site in landscape setting area H5 and sets out that that area has a medium to high sensitivity and a low capacity to accommodate new built form. Again, Mr. Longden doesn't agree insofar as the appeal site is concerned, because this relatively small area has been affected by the changes to the baseline landscape since it was prepared. Those changes have reduced the extent of visibility to and from the appeal site. The capacity analysis was prepared according to a methodology which is now out of date, and the appeal site doesn't display some of the features described in the analysis. It has no vegetation associated with woodlands and river, it's not proximate to the stream valley, it's not widely visible, it's not tranquil, it's not part of the approach road to Northern Holstead, and it doesn't display a strong structure of pre-18th century field enclosure. The 2015 Settlement Fringes evaluation sets out to provide a finer grained analysis than the 2007 one. As a result, the appeal site is part of a smaller parcel 5C, which is roughly twice the area of the appeal site. That assessment ascribes a medium capacity to that relatively small parcel. Parcels scored as having a medium or higher capacity are described in that document as being the most likely to be suitable for potential development. And since that report was prepared, the housing to the north of the appeal site has been permitted and constructed. That new development abuts the northern side of parcel 5C, and Mr. Longden sets out why the part of parcel 5C which contains the appeal site has different characteristics from the eastern part. It abuts that new residential development, it's less open, it has a more limited variety of land use, and it has a poorer landscape condition because of historic loss of hedgerows along the A131 and within the eastern field. The 2015 evaluation also uses an outdated methodology. Overall, the 2015 evaluation's assessment of the site having a medium capacity is not accurate as regards the appeal site, which has a greater capacity for and lower sensitivity to development. The illustrative details of the scheme progressed as the application was considered. The latest iteration is revision ZA of the Development Framework Plan. Development would be carried out so that it would be confined to the northern part of the site away from the steeper valley sides. And out of a total site area of 13.34 hectares, only 5.69 hectares would be used for the housing development. The Spine Road corridor in the southern part of the site and the land reserve for the roundabout would comprise a further 1.51 hectares, and that leaves significant areas that can be used for significant amounts of green infrastructure. Green space 3.9 hectares, suds 0.32 hectares, and woodland 1.92 hectares. Overall, Some 46% of the site would be used for green infrastructure. The scheme would also have other features that help to integrate it into its surroundings, which Mr Longdon sets out at paragraph 6.7 of his proof. They include a peripheral footpath within a green corridor, new pedestrian linkages to the north, enhancements to boundary vegetation, open areas between the proposed housing and the extant housing to the north, a wide green corridor along the southern edge of the proposed housing, substantial retention of existing internal field boundaries, and mitigation planting to replace the 3 trees required to be felled to locate the site access and the hedgerow loss to the internal hedgerow boundary to allow for the new west to east road. There are some differences of opinion between Mr Longdon and the council's landscape consultants about the impacts of the scheme, which Mr Longdon addresses at paragraphs 8.6 to 24 of his proof. But I'm not going to dwell on them in closing, because the consultant's overall conclusion was that the landscape character effects of the appeal scheme would be acceptable, and they didn't query the overall conclusions of the LVIA, nor did the officer's report. The landscape character effects of the appeal scheme after 15 years would be a beneficial effect on landscape features, given the significant amounts and variety of green infrastructure proposed, a minor adverse to negligible residual effect on the landscape character of the appeal site and its surrounding area, and negligible effects upon the wider landscape character area. The council's consultant agreed that whilst there would be adverse character effects, they would be within an acceptable range. Most adverse effects would be adequately mitigated, and there were no landscape impact reasons to refuse permission. And the officer's report agreed, saying, from a landscape point of view, there is no objection to the principle of developing the site in question, and officers consider that the proposal has the potential to respond positively to local character. Paragraph 11.4.17 of the officer's report went so far as to conclude that the impacts upon the character and appearance of the area in this urban fringe location would not be material. The appellant, council's consultant and the council officers themselves all agree that the landscape character effects of the scheme would be acceptable. There is no evidence to support the reason for refusal which the council formally proposed, and no reasoned basis for concluding that character effects would be unacceptable. Turning then to visual effects, the LVIA obviously addressed those, and at the council's request, a photo montage report was prepared and submitted. The assessment of visual effects was also carried out in accordance with Glivia 3, as the council's consultant confirmed. Council's consultant disputed some of the individual findings relating to individual viewpoints, which Mr Longdon addresses at 9.13 to 9.26 of his proof. However, again, those points don't need to be addressed in detail in closing, because they don't reveal any substantive difference in the parties' analysis or any difference in the overall judgment of the acceptability of visual effects. The appeal site is relatively visually enclosed, and visual effects would be limited to locations in close proximity to the site and in the context of views already affected by built form. At year 15, the residual visual effects on the limited range of visual receptors would be as follows. From the A131 and the end of Russell's Road to the west of the site, the residual effects would be minor, adverse to negligible. From the 2 footpaths to the east, 8819 and 8821, the residual effects would be minor adverse to negligible. From the more distant public rights of way, there would be negligible residual effects, and from the minor roads and the public right of way to the south of the site, the continuation of footpath 8819, there would be negligible effects. The council's consultant concluded that visual effects would be within an acceptable range, and the officer report concluded that the impacts on the appearance of the urban fringe location would not be material, and the adverse visual effect is limited by landform and vegetation, extensive planting is proposed, and that limited weight should be afforded to the visual harm. Mr Longdon has tested the appeal scheme against policy LPP 67 of the Section 2 local plan, and his conclusion that the appeal scheme complies with the relevant requirements of the policy is, I submit, robust, and he sets out detailed reasoning for that at paragraphs 10.2 to 11 of his proof. He's also considered policy SP3 of the Section 1 local plan. That policy requires the maintenance of the existing character of settlements, the avoidance of coalescence between settlements, and the conservation of settlements settings. The policy also supports the conservation and enhancement of the natural environment beyond the main settlements. The appeal scheme does safeguard the character of Holstead. It causes no coalescence. It conserves the settlement setting and supports the conservation and enhancement of the natural environment beyond the settlement. The appeal scheme complies with the requirements of SP3, which relate to character and appearance. It also complies with policies SP7, LPP 42, 47, 50, 52, 63, 65 and 66, conclusions which the council never challenged, even before it decided not to defend the appeal. The appeal scheme also complies with the relevant parts of the framework. It makes efficient use of land and secures multiple benefits. It would be well designed. It includes opportunities to incorporate trees. The appellants carried out consultation with the LPA and local community. It complies with the development plan's design policies, and it recognises the intrinsic character of the countryside and responds to it. Overall, the landscape and visual impacts of the appeal scheme would be acceptable and in compliance with the development plan and national policy. I then turn to the question of overdevelopment, not a main issue identified by you, Madam, but something that's mentioned in the former reason for refusal. Although it was never a main issue, the reason for refusal, which was formally pursued, alleged that the appeal scheme would lead to overdevelopment. There's no evidence that the appeal site is not an appropriate location to accommodate up to 200 additional dwellings because of some fear of overdevelopment. The simple number of proposed new houses, either in absolute terms or when compared to the size of the existing settlement, of themselves tell one nothing. They are just numbers. Instead, one has to consider whether any real-world harm of relevance to the planning system would be caused. There is none that comes close to justifying refusal of the scheme. The council has never claimed that there would be any insuperable infrastructure capacity constraints, whether related to highways, education, healthcare, libraries, or any other physical infrastructure. Nor is there any evidence that local commercial services couldn't cope. Indeed, they would probably benefit from additional business. Nor was this one of those cases where the rather nebulous concept of community cohesion was ever raised by the council. There is simply no evidence of any impact that could begin to show that the appeal scheme comprises objectionable overdevelopment at Holstead. I then turn to the question of the 5-year supply and the weight that should be given to the relevant development plan policies. This has fallen away as a main issue because the council's latest 5-year supply assessment claims a 4.86-year supply, and the appellants agreed not to challenge that claim, and it is thus common ground that the council has a supply that stands at no more than that 4.86-year figure. As a result, the housing supply route into paragraph 11D of the framework is triggered, and the most important policies for determining the appeal are deemed to be out of date. Of course, the next step is to identify what those most important policies for determining the appeal are, and then decide how much weight to ascribe to each of them. For clarity, the appellant accepts that the lack of supply route is the only one by which section 11D of the framework is triggered in this case, and it doesn't contend that the most important policies are collectively out of date by reason of them being collectively inconsistent with the framework. The analysis of the weight to be afforded to the most important policies can be carried out by reference to each such policy individually. No one's disputing our position that the most important policies for determining the appeal are Section 1 local plan policies SP 1, 3 and 7 and Section 2 local plan policies LPP 1, 42, 52 and 67. Policy SP1 is the policy that expresses the presumption in favour of sustainable development, and it reflects the test in section 38.6 of the 2004 Act. It's not inconsistent with the framework, it's not out of date, and it can be afforded full weight. Policy SP3, addressing the spatial strategy for the North Essex authorities, has been addressed above. The appeal scheme accords with the spatial strategy and with policy SP3, but if there is thought to be any conflict with it, then policy SP3 and the conflict with it has to be afforded limited weight, given that it's a strategy which is not delivering a 5-year supply of housing land. Adherence to the strategy, in combination with adherence to policy LPP1, would not deliver sufficient housing land in the present circumstances. Policy SP7 sets out the placemaking principles of the plan. Its terms accord with the framework, and the policy can be afforded full weight. Many of its provisions are relevant to applications for full planning permission or to reserve matters applications, but the council's former case alleged a breach of the principle that requires the creation of well-connected places that prioritise the needs of pedestrians, cyclists and public transport services above those of the private car. On the basis of Mr. Regan's evidence, this principle is met. The site is adjacent to one of the settlements at the top of the settlement hierarchy, has good pedestrian and cycle access to a good range of local facilities, and it provides good access to bus services. Car journeys need be relatively short, and Halstead has a lower average commuting distance than the district average. The scheme accords with policy SP7. Policy LPP1 uses development boundaries as the dividing line between a permissive approach within them and a restrictive approach outside them. The appeal site is outside the settlement boundary for Halstead, and the appeal scheme doesn't meet the limited criteria when permission will be granted on land outside the settlement boundary. The appellant therefore accepts that the appeal scheme breaches policy LPP1. However, that policy and the breach of it should be afforded only limited weight because of the lack of a 5-year supply, and because adherence to that development management approach would not allow the council to achieve a deliverable 5-year supply. Further, although located beyond the designated settlement boundary, the appeal scheme would comprise sustainable development. It wouldn't cause harm that would justify or require planning permission to be refused, not granted, but would bring extensive benefits as set out below. Insofar as policy LPP1 seeks to protect landscape character, the appellant's evidence shows that the appeal scheme would cause limited adverse impact to the character of the landscape, and this is a further reason to afford limited weight to the breach of policy LPP1 in this case. Policy LPP42 requires the facilitation of sustainable transport modes. The policy fully accords with the framework, it deserves full weight, and the appeal scheme complies with those parts of it that are applicable to outline applications. Policy LPP52 is a long policy on layout and design. Much of it is also only relevant to full or reserve matters applications. The council's former case focused on Part K on sustainable transport. That part of the policy is complied with, and the policy overall attracts full weight as it is consistent with the framework. Finally, policy LPP67 deals with landscape character and features. The policy seeks to ensure development is suitable for its local context, and it requires that the different roles and character of the landscape across the district to be taken into account. It requires new development to successfully integrate into the local landscape, having regard to landscape features. The policy accords with the framework, and it can be afforded full weight. The scheme also complies with it. The appeal scheme has been fully appraised in an LVIA, the methodology and conclusions of which were accepted by council officers and their consultants. The appeal scheme could be carried out so as to successfully integrate into its surroundings, as shown on the illustrative development framework. And whilst there would inevitably be a degree of change which can be seen as harmful, the harm would be limited, and overall the policy's aims are met and the policy is complied with. Mr. Dutton accepts that the breach of Section 2 Local Plan Policy LPP1 means that the appeal scheme is in breach of the development plan taken as a whole, even though the other most important policies are all complied with, and the implications of that for decision making are addressed when I deal with the planning balance in a few moments. Third-party concerns are addressed in Mr. Dutton's evidence at Appendix 2, which contains a review of the main points made by third parties at application stage and the appellant's responses to them. The material points made in that appendix have been dealt with when I've addressed specific comments in these submissions. I then turn to scheme benefits. The scheme would bring the following important benefits. First, up to 140 units of additional market housing. The council doesn't have a 5-year supply, and it produces no evidence of when a 5-year supply is likely to be achieved. This is a benefit deserving significant weight given those positions. Second, it would deliver up to 60 affordable units. This would be 30% of the total housing in the scheme, which fully accords with Section 2 Local Plan Policy LPP 31. The district has an annual need for 218 affordable units from 2013 to 2037. In the first 9 years of that period, the council has delivered 433 affordable homes fewer than the aggregate requirement, nearly 2 years worth of need. It follows that the affordable need in Braintree is rising, and more people's and families' needs for affordable accommodation are not being met. Further, the median affordability ratio for the district has got markedly worse between 2013 and 21, and the provision of affordable homes through the appeal scheme is a benefit which also deserves significant weight. Third, a large proportion of the site, about 46%, would be green infrastructure, which would be accessible to the general public as well as the residents. Mr. Dutton affords moderate weight to that. Fourth, contributions would be made to the delivery of a new community building in Holstead, and whilst the appellant accepts that the contributions would be compliant with the SIL regulations and thus required to make the scheme acceptable in planning terms, it would also provide benefit to existing residents. There would be a £300,000 contribution to enhance cycling infrastructure. This too would benefit existing residents, even though that contribution is also SIL compliant. The same is true of the contribution to allotment provision. The scheme would also contribute to education and healthcare capacity. Mr. Dutton affords moderate weight to all of the community infrastructure benefits. The appeal scheme would secure a net gain for biodiversity through the provision of plant species of known wildlife value as part of the green infrastructure and sustainable drainage system provision, and through the provision of bat roosting opportunities, reptile and amphibian hibernacular, bird boxes and hedgehog foraging routes. This too is also given moderate weight by Mr. Dutton. The SUD scheme could secure betterment in terms of surface water runoff, and the scheme would create economic benefits of moderate weight through construction spend of around £22.7 million, supporting about 189 full-time equivalent construction jobs over a 6-year bill period, with 206 full-time equivalent jobs in associated industries. It would create £7.6 million gross value added over the build period, and it would contain about 257 economically active residents out of the total population of about 480, who would generate gross expenditure of about £5.86 million annually, much of which would be available to local businesses. Further, the scheme would deliver part of a southern bypass for Holstead, which has been a policy aspiration since at least 2005, and it's supported by policy LPP 45 of the Section 2 local plan. Land would be further reserved for a roundabout at the western end of the road within the site to facilitate other parts of the bypass route. Policy LPP 45 only seeks to safeguard the route, but the appeal scheme would actually deliver part of it, and without reliance upon any public funding. It's not a road to nowhere, as some objectors contend, because it forms the access that serves the appeal scheme. The partial bypass provision, is a benefit of significant weight. I then turn to scheme harms to weigh against those benefits. There is the harm that flows from the breach of policy LPP 1. This deserves limited weight for the reasons I've already given. There would be the modest and limited landscape and visual harm that has been described in detail above. This too deserves limited weight. There are no other harms to weigh against the scheme. I then turn to the planning balance. As there's no deliverable 5-year supply, paragraph 11D of the framework is triggered, and paragraph 11D1 requires consideration of whether any policies listed in footnote 7 provide a clear reason for refusing planning permission, and 2 issues need to be addressed. First, as Mr. Dutton sets out in his section 2.5, the appeal site is within the zone of influence for the Blackwater Estuary SPA SAC Ramsar site. In 2018, Natural England advised that there would be likely significant effects from new residential development in that zone, such that appropriate assessment would be required. Such an AA was carried out by the council, and it was approved by Natural England in 2019, and Natural England's approval of the appropriate assessment is core document 423, with appropriate mitigation, which, as you've heard this morning, is secured by the planning obligation. No significant effect on the protected habitat would arise. Secondly, the archaeology and built heritage statement that accompanied the application scoped out the Halstead conservation area as a heritage asset that might be impacted. In its initial consultation response, Essex County Council's historic buildings consultant said that the conservation area may incur a degree of harm, albeit at the lower end of this scale. However, they later updated that assessment to say that no designated assets would be harmed. But given the requirements of Section 72 of the Listed Buildings Act, Mr. Dutton has carried out a heritage balance in his evidence to compare any heritage harm to the public benefits of the scheme, and he concludes that any harm to the conservation area, assuming any exists, would be far outweighed by the public benefits of the proposal. There are thus no footnote 7 policies that provide a clear reason for refusing planning permission, and so the tilted balance in paragraph 11d2 of the framework should be applied. The appellant's acceptance that the breach of LPP1 amounts to non-compliance with the development plan overall results in the conclusion that permission should be refused unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Here, there are manifold reasons why planning permission should be granted, notwithstanding the breach of the development plan. They arise from the limited weight to be given to the breach of policy LPP1, the compliance with all of the relevant development plan policies, all other relevant development plan policies, the lack of a 5-year supply, and the triggering and application of the tilted planning balance. When the considerable range of benefits and the weight they deserve is compared to the very limited type and extent of harm, it is submitted that it is plain that the harm from the appeal scheme would fall very far short of significantly and demonstrably outweighing the benefits that the scheme would bring. That's not a surprising outcome, given, firstly, council officers recommended granting planning permission even when it considered it did have a 5-year supply, and so the decision-making test was simply section 38.6 on a flat balance. Secondly, the irresistible inference to be drawn from the council's decision not to contest the appeal is that it too has decided that it couldn't make a case that permission should be refused if the tilted balance was in play. And thirdly, the position is now even clearer in the council's opening statement. Paragraph 14 expressly states that the council accepts that the adverse impacts of the scheme wouldn't significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. The only conclusion which can be drawn from that is that the council accepts, although it won't say it, is that the appeal scheme should be allowed. And so in conclusion, the appeal scheme comprises much needed development which would be sustainable development, and it ought to proceed in the public interest, and the appellant therefore asks for the appeal to be allowed. And unless I can assist you any further, Madam, those are my closing submissions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carter. Thank you. Okay, so I think that concludes the final day of the inquiry. So before we finish, there's just a few matters that need to be finalised. So the site visit, are you still content that it can be done unaccompanied, or would you prefer that it's accompanied?
We are still very happy for it to be unaccompanied, Madam.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ranton, goes the council's.
As are we, Madam. We've got the
Yes.
the route plotted, so we're content for that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Are there any particular places, this might be one for Mr. Jones maybe, but any particular places that are best to park to then do the walking routes, or is it sort of fairly self-explanatory when I get there?
There's a couple of different places we can, what we'll do, Ma'am, if it's okay, we'll mark up a plan and indicate some parking places for you, just so you've got that to hand. We can do that, it's no problem.
Good. Yes, thank you very much. And the new development to the north of the site, the routes are shown through there. Is it still under construction, or can I walk through there now? Is it?
No, you can walk through. The development to the north is completed, so you can walk through.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you very much. That's really helpful. Well, I'm quite happy to do that unaccompanied. I think it'll probably be Tuesday of next week, unless there's any objections to that. And I'll drive around the suggested car route. I shall walk the suggested walking routes, and the new plan, which shows 2 options, I shall go up one and down the other, so that I've done both. So that's good. Thank you very much for providing those. Are there any other issues to be raised at this point, any procedure matters or anything like that?
Not from us, thank you, Madam. No.
No, thank you. Okay, so I'm just waiting for a signed copy of the section 106. So what I'll do is I'll close the inquiry here, but with the exception of the submission of that and the additional plan just for the parking spaces. I can confirm I've got all the documents now that I was expecting, so thank you for sending those through. And I've also received now the appellant's list of witnesses and qualifications. So thank you very much for that. So I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank everyone who's contributed. It's been really helpful to me, and I'm very grateful for your time in the inquiry. And if there are no other matters, the inquiry is now closed. Thank you very much.
Madam.
Have a good afternoon. Thank you.